All right, here we go on the Dregs podcast. Pleased to be joined again by former NHL general manager Dave Nonis, who frequents the podcast on a regular basis. I guess we'll get down to the business. It's All-Star weekend, so there's a lot of celebrating, and there's a good amount of entertainment value going into the weekend, Dave. But let's look back at the Vancouver trade with the New York Islanders, right? Bo Horvat goes to the Islanders. So does a trade like that, we're just less than a month from the March 3rd trade deadline. Does a trade like that spark the market, or is that just media driven because us in the media just want that market to generate a little bit more buzz value out there?
It might spark it a little bit. I was a little bit surprised that it did happen before All-Star weekend. But I think in this situation, we have more teams this year that are trying to get in. Last year, I think it was clear, especially in the East, which teams were getting in and which weren't it by this time. Now it's not so clear. And obviously, the New York Islanders feel it's pretty important for them to make a push, for them to try to step up right now and pay a pretty good price to get a really good player. There's a couple schools of thought on when you make a deal. One is you wait to the end and you see what teams jump in, try to get kind of a bidding war. But in this situation, it's pretty clear that Vancouver got what they were asking for. Why wait any longer and risk an injury? So if there's more teams that see this is happening that are kind of in the same situation as the Islanders, there may not be in, but they really feel like they have to get in, or a team that's just barely hanging on. This might pick up a little quicker than we would have originally expected.
Okay, Dave. So if you're another team, maybe you're perhaps Dylan Larkin and the Detroit Red Wings, or Ryan O'Reilly and the Blues, and even Jonathan Toews in Chicago. Like, if you're one of those GMs, there goes one of the markets for a center. Does that pick your pace up a little bit? Does that make you a little more nervous, the Horvat trade?
Yeah, it might a little bit. There's some different things that fall into it, and you touched on a couple of them already. Some of those players have protection. So yeah, they're gonna dictate where they're going. If Jonathan Toews wants to get traded, he's going to pick his team. That's going to impact it a little bit, but it might have teams step up with firmer offers quicker to see if they can land a player. Because you're right, there's only so many chairs that are available to sit in, and you don't want to be left out in the cold. There's also the situation of which teams really want to make that deal. Is it the price going to be so steep that they're going to just pass, or wait and see if the prices come down? That's another school of thought too. Mm-hmm. Listen, whether or not you think that was too much to pay or not enough, it was still a substantial trade. There's no other way to look at it. There's some pretty good players, and on a first round pick that went that way. There may not be a lot of teams that are necessarily going to make that trade, that are going to sit back and see if that price tag eventually drops. So there's a lot of factors that are going to go into this. It'll be very interesting to watch it as it plays out over the next several weeks.
Okay, so you're the general manager of the Boston Bruins. You've lost 6 games all year. And what do you do with that? I mean, yeah, you'd like, if you can improve your team, sure. How tricky to jump into the chemistry of what's been an almost perfect season for them?
I think you as a player have been around it a lot of times in terms of adding pieces at the deadline. I think it is pretty tricky when you have a team that's humming along like this. Every team in the league that I think is playing well would still love to add a player, that would give them a little bit more depth, a little bit more, of something they might be lacking. It's a very long playoff grind. You think you can get through it with 6 or 7 defensemen, you can't. So you might want to still add, but I don't think you add just for the sake of adding. I don't think you want to disrupt that room. I don't think you want to disrupt the chemistry that they have. I think you look hard at trying to add a piece that complements all those players, but I don't think you try to add somebody just to say, we're doing something, because that team is, I just don't see them slowing down. They have shown no signs of it. They might have a little bit of a blip here and there, but from top to bottom right now, if they can stay healthy, I think they'll be very careful about what he adds to that group.
Yeah, I've been around a long time, but I was never on a team that had 6 losses at the All-Star break. We had 6 losses in October.
With the Atlanta Thrashers, did you have 6 wins at the All-Star break or not quite?
We might have. That first year, we got hot near the end to get to 14 wins. So,
all right, all three of us are old enough to remember the good old days, and I say that in the spirit of the wheeling and dealing and the trading that never seems to happen as much as we'd like it, from a media perspective, a fan standpoint, in a salary cap era. So help us bridge the gap here, Dave. Take us back to the good old days, right? The pre-salary cap. I mean, was it organized chaos when you looked at your team and the trade deadline is coming? You didn't have to worry about the cap. You had to worry about your owner telling you whether you had money to spend or you didn't have money to spend, versus now, where I get the sense on an annual basis, there are managers, and you were probably one of them, you feel like you're banging your head against the wall. You know that you want to get better. You can see how you maybe can get in the fight and contend for a Stanley Cup, but because of the financial restrictions, it's just next to impossible to do. So take us between both worlds.
Yeah, it's a lot different now. I mean, first of all, pre-salary cap, there was the have and have-nots, and that's just a fact. In Vancouver, we had a budget. There was no cap, but we had a budget, and if you're going to go above that budget, you had to get approval from ownership. Even with that, that budget, and we had a healthy budget, we were still 50%, give or take, of what the Detroit Red Wings were paying their players. So it was a significant difference. You could make a trade back then and not worry about going over your budget, because you could either get more money down the road, or as Pat Quinn used to say, I don't worry about the budget till June 30th. In other words, if I'm over by $5 million, I'll find a way of balancing it, but I don't have to do it today. That's not the case now. No, that's not the case now. Your cap is, you have to deal with it. You can't go over it and say, I'll fix it by June. It's not like that. So it is a lot different. When we traded Pavel Bure to Florida, that was in a non-cap era. But it had some significance for both teams. Florida paid a record price at that time for a player. I think it was over $8 million per season. I think the last year that deal was $10 million. We brought in Ed Jovanovski, who we were paying $2+ million to, and that gave us the flexibility of down the road signing, Marcus Naslund and players that were going to earn more money. It made it easy to do for both teams because there was no restrictions on where you could go. Today, it'd be pretty difficult to move players that are going to make, $8, $9, $10 million. It's almost impossible. So it is a lot different. I think that the managers have done a good job over time adjusting to the changes. It took a while to get the nuances correct into how you put your team together. But I still think there's some growth there for teams to improve on how they manage their own cap and give themselves flexibility to make a deal as you get close to the deadline. Because I think that's still a very exciting part of the game and the season, is seeing which teams add players and the impact that they have at the end of the day.
So as you're talking about that, I'm thinking of the adage of, your teams are built in the summer and you tweak them during the season, if at all possible. So when a GM is putting that roster together in July and August, I mean, if I can see it, they certainly can, that there is no room past this roster I put together. So is there any thought of keeping back a little money in the summer, or is that, then I'm not using enough of my cap? To me, it seems like it's just a cul-de-sac. You just keep going up there and turn around and come back again.
No, when I talked about there's some things that we can learn, I think that you just learned it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I think the teams that leave a little bit of space and have that money grow as the season goes, they put themselves in a position to add someone good, an impact player, if in fact their team is able to challenge down the road. And when I say a little bit of money, if you look at saving $2 million off the cap, $2.5 million, and I know I don't have the calculation in front of me, but that number grows dramatically. You're talking about a player that, or two players that could make up to $10 or $15, $20 million. Yeah. I also think, Ray, you have to be honest to where your team is at, and adding a $2 or $3 million player for your team when it really doesn't have a chance to compete, or it's just on its way up. I think that's where managers have to be really transparent with ownership and with their fan base. And I think that if you do that and you can keep some room, you can use that space to either get better or to take assets on if your team isn't quite good enough.
All right, well, be honest with us here. With the trade deadline looming, I mean, we're asked the same thing as we do our radio cycle and other podcasts and the variety of things we do. How busy you think it's going to be? There's tons of speculation, and there are some good players that we know are in play. You know, O'Reilly's got to get healthy. What's Vegas going to do? Stone is out indefinitely. Tarasenko in St. Louis. Go down the list. But that doesn't always translate into activity beyond what we normally see on trade deadline day, which is depth changes, right? So do you get a sense of the people you're talking to, it's going to be more involved with some of these bigger players?
I think there'll be several substantial moves this year just because of the way it's playing out and the number of players that are on teams that may not be meeting expectations, and these players are UFAs. I think that they will get moved. So I do expect there's going to be some, when I say significant, I think interesting trades, maybe more interesting than the last couple of years. I think that the depth trade is still going to be the bulk of the deals that we see go forward because There's only so many people that can take on some of the players you mentioned, whether it's the assets they want to give up or the salaries that that they have. So I think it'll be a little bit of both, Dregs. I also think the one issue that we're seeing a little bit is injuries. And if what you pay for a player that, we all think he's going to come back and be 100%, but that may not be the case. So there might be a little bit of negotiation that's involved there, prior to the deadline, and if any of these trades are actually completed, that involve the injury status of some of these players.
Good deal. All right, Dave. Well, we'll leave it there. You got some snowmobiling to get to, and Ray's in Florida. I'm in Thunder Bay, Ontario, where it's crispy here too. It's like minus 27 Celsius. So we're gonna. I know. One of us made a smart choice.
Just like the old days in trail, Ray.
Oh, yeah. But the old days in trail, I was younger and I had a better hat. So I wasn't too worried about it.
Thanks for joining us, Dave.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.